So we are now on to the J exercises part 2, where we articulate the relevance of the examples. So have in front of you the J exercises and your answers, right? So we can go through it and get good at this. The main tip before we begin is don't get sidetracked by the truthfulness of the support. Make sure you're staying focused on the relevant. In your brain, focus first on what is the conclusion and so what is the support, and just keep asking yourself, does that work as support, or does the fallacies we did in part 1, does that ruin the relevance as support? And then what I will do is I will give a solid answer that would get full credit that I would expect most people would get, and then I'll also give my own personal answer to show you that there are other possible ways to think about this. And of course, I think you will find my inventing these controversies pretty fun. When we have the big quiz note for the fallacies part, a big part of the credit will be from what we call part 1, listing the possible fallacies, making sure you get the primary fallacy, and then finding the secondary ones if they're there. When it comes to the second part, articulating relevance, please note that the score doesn't come from you saying whether it's relevant or not. The score comes from you justifying that relevance. So your explanation for why it's relevant or not, it's the explanation that gets you the credit, not just telling me how relevant it is. So example A. Again, using our standard little paradigm, the conclusion that should be supported is everyone should support the death penalty. So does the black and white fallacy ruin that support? A solid answer would be to say that this has almost no relevance, right? This is a complete black and white fallacy, right? There are plenty of other options besides killing them and letting them go kill some more. We could have lifetime sentences. You could have forced lobotomies. My own answer, I would say, I think there's some, or at least a little bit of relevance here, because we do have to worry about repeat offenses. B. The conclusion here is that this is going too far, and, right, this fear of what's going to happen next with our smoking rights is supposed to be the support. So we ask, right, does that work as support, or does this slippery slope and fear ruin it? A good common answer would be there's a little bit of support here, but it's overstated, right? There's no reason to be that much afraid the government is going to watch us in our homes. My own answer, though, is that this is mostly or maybe even completely relevant because this slippery slope accusation doesn't fit here. The idea of a slippery slope is that the first cause has very little relationship to the further actions that we need to be afraid of. But I think in this case, I think the chain of events are based on the same cause. Why is there a smoking ban in restaurants? Because of the dangers of secondhand smoke. Why could parents be liable? Because of the dangers of secondhand smoke. And actually, you will find that there are laws like this on the books in different states. C. The conclusion, I won't try that workout supplement, is that supported well by two guys took that and their junk shriveled, or does the hasty generalization ruin it? I'm assuming that most people will think this has no relevance, or maybe tiny relevance, because you will argue, and this sounds smart, that's 2 people out of the maybe thousands of people that use it. But my answer, I think this is mostly or maybe even completely relevant. Let me explain. When it comes to something being hasty, it depends on how important or how big the generalization is. But in this case, I don't think this is overgeneral. Because, no offense, but junk is a pretty important organ, and I don't need a lot of good reasons to take a different supplement or to not take one at all. So I think this is very relevant. Even if I just hear of one person out of thousands who have this problem, I don't need good reasons not to take a supplement. It's a very trivial thing to take one as opposed to the others, or stop taking them altogether. So I don't think the conclusion is too general, so it doesn't need that much evidence. Indeed, the conclusion is the death penalty is morally fine, and does begging the question ruin this evidence that murderers deserve to be killed? I think most people would think that there is some relevance here. I have a hard time seeing it, but what's going on is in your brain, you're filling in the evidence that isn't provided. Most people hear that and they say, well, of course murderers deserve to be killed because of eye for an eye justice or something like that. Now notice, that would be a decent argument, but the argument here doesn't say that. It begs the question by not bringing in any justification like eye for an eye. So I think there's almost no relevance here. I don't see anything but circularity and repeating the same opinion twice. E. The conclusion is that animal rights people shouldn't pick on rodeos, and we want to see if these smiling faces and the determination it takes to ride the broncos and rope the hogs is good evidence, or is it ruined by the red herring? Here, I don't see two possible answers. It is a pure red herring. Those have nothing to do with animal rights. So, one answer. No relevance. The support here has nothing to do with animal rights. It completely changes the subject. Example F. Conclusion. Women definitely hate this shirt, and the reason given is that women at the gyno office wouldn't give him the time of day. Now, I think many people, and this is a good answer, would say there's no relevance. It's clearly this guy has no game. Who would pick up on women at a gynecological office? This guy's a loser. My answer, though, is some or tiny relevance. I'm sorry, I'm going to goof off again, but there could be something to this shirt. Right now, imagine, are there truly offensive shirts that would completely turn off women to this guy? Sure, right? Think of them. I've seen this shirt out there. It says, quote, "Free gynecological exams, meet me in my van." That would be an offensive shirt. Or maybe we can go with the standard mesh tank top with the chest hair sticking out of it. How about the Hawaiian shirt with a medallion and button down to here? Could be something to do with the shirt. Example G. The conclusion that I am not going to take Gus's advice on my philosophy assignment, is this supported by his failing, or is this an ad hominem? I think most people would argue that this is not an ad hominem at all. This has complete relevance. If he failed, we shouldn't take his advice. That's a good, relevant reason for not taking his advice. I would argue, though, that it's mostly relevant, but I think the attack might be a little too harsh because, I mean, seriously, he's taken the class that many times. He at least knows how to fail. So listen to his advice, and do the opposite. Example H. The conclusion, God must not exist. The support, because I haven't seen him. Is this workable support, or does the appeal to ignorance ruin this argument? I think most people would say there could be a wide range of answers on one like this. I think the most common answer would be, this is mostly relevant, because having not seen something can be good evidence that it doesn't exist, and most people hear the word seen in this example and think of not directly seeing God, but I don't see evidence for God, and so this makes sense for not believing in something that you don't see any evidence for. I would argue, though, my personal answer would be, this has no relevance because it's simply a category mistake. You don't look for seen things when you're talking about something unseen. God is by definition invisible. So this, in my estimation, would be like arguing there's no oxygen in this room because I can't see it. No, you can't see oxygen. It's invisible. Example I. The conclusion is, right, that we have these rights, and the evidence is that it's obvious. I think a common answer would be that this is mostly relevant because rights should be obvious to anyone. The rights to life, that should make total sense, so self-evidence is there. We do see that these rights are obvious. I would argue, though, that it's only somewhat relevant because I don't think these rights are obvious to most people. I think, for example, historically, slavery, how women were treated, right, show that these rights aren't obvious. And, I mean, take the right to life. We have a country, the United States, that doesn't think healthcare is a basic right, where other countries would say it's obvious if you have a right to life, then the government should promote healthcare. See, so I don't think it's obvious. Example J. The argument is stating support for the U.S.'s unflinching stance, and it gives Jim Caviezel's support for that stance as an argument. I think most people would say that there is no relevance here. I think you could give a solid answer than saying appealing to his unqualified authority is silly. He's just an actor. What does he know about this stuff? I would argue, though, and I think some of you would, that there is some relevance here. Sure, this is mostly an appeal to unqualified authority, but I think anyone could study anything. And maybe this actor, Jim Caviezel, is such a serious actor that he studies everything about the part, including, right, the issues of foreign policy and the politics of Israel. Who knows? Anyone could study anything, so there could be a little bit of authority hidden in this actor. Example K. So example K is arguing that Jeff has this ridiculous position. He wants us all to be homeless beggars. I think most people would answer, and this is a solid answer, that there's no relevance here. That's not Jeff's position at all. But I think there's also a solid answer could be saying that there's some relevance here. It could be an issue that Jeff's argument is a little overstated. We should worry about money a little. Jeff saying we should stop focusing on money. Of course, his real position is we should find something we're interested in, try to meet our needs through our work and stuff like that. But it is relevant to say that we should show some concern about money. Example L. The conclusion that our government is generous and kind or something like that, and then the possible euphemisms. So the issue here is not, are these relevant? The issue is, how misleading are the euphemisms? A common answer, I think, would be that we are not misled by these euphemisms. We know that people talk this way about their history, and so it's not misleading. But I would argue, again, the former answer is a solid answer, but I would argue that these are purposely misleading, that we do get completely the wrong idea about these historical events, so I think there's a good argument either side. Example N. The conclusion that you should test drive one of these trucks, the support is you're a stud. I think most people would argue very well that this has no relevance. They change the subject completely into flattery, and they're just flattering the guy instead of talking about what kind of truck it is or what his needs in a truck are. Great. I, though, am going to try to piss you off and argue that this is mostly relevant, or at least somewhat relevant. Because purchasing, for most people, is a very emotional interaction. And what are we talking about? Power trucks. Do people buy power trucks mostly because of their utility or because they want to feel big and strong? I would argue that at least half of the people buy cars, power trucks, sports cars especially, because of how they make us feel about ourselves. So I think, here, let me give you a weird analogy that you won't like. Let's say that you are at a store and you try on some jeans. You come out of the dressing room and the salesperson says, forgive me for this, "Oh my gosh, your butt looks so cute in those jeans." Are you more likely to keep looking at those jeans and maybe even buying them because of the flattery? Because that's why we often buy products, because we want to feel good about ourselves. I think there's a lot of relevance in flattery when it comes to at least test driving a truck, maybe even buying it. Example N. We should get some ice cream from Jack's Parlor because we feel sorry for that nice guy. Most people will argue pity here is almost completely a fallacy because we didn't even talk about, does he have good ice cream, right? What is the service like? What are the prices like? These things would be relevant reasons. Great answer. But I would think another great answer would be that this is mostly or maybe even completely relevant. Him being a nice guy and feeling sorry for him, to me, is a perfectly good reason for shopping at his place. As long as his ice cream's okay, I just like supporting nice people. Example O. The conclusion the tax system in this country is unfair is supported with everybody thinks so. The typical answer, yes, is that the appeal to popularity ruins this argument. It has almost no relevance because people are so stupid and you can't judge popular opinion as the best way for evidence. That is a solid answer, but I would argue that this has some relevance, or is at least a little relevant, If people genuinely don't like their tax system, that's a good reason to at least look into it being unfair. Now, let me give some perspective. Most Americans think that everyone hates taxes. But if we look at other countries, especially other countries that have much higher tax rates than we do, they don't all hate their taxes because they see what it's spent on. For example, if you're in Finland, Sweden, Switzerland, Japan, right, Australia, you would say, look at our roads, look at our healthcare system that our taxes paid for, look at our universities that are free, and they would say, taxes are fair. So, I think that the relevance is not obviously none. I think there's some or a lot of relevance in asking the population what they think of the taxes. Finally, example P. The argument is for you should get a health exam, and the reason given is you could die of cancer that could be prevented. I think most people would argue that this is mostly relevant, that that's a good reason, but the fear, right, is a bit exaggerated. I would argue this is completely relevant. It just says you may die of cancer that could be prevented. Perfectly good reason to get a health exam.